Thank you very much. I would also like to most cordially welcome you here. Herbert Lechner is my name. Very glad to see that you found the time to come here and listen to our presentation. As we already announced, we would like to have something of a dialogue here on stage. I will be responsible for facts and figures, and Mr. Herbert will tell us about his interpretation and will also draw on his rich experience from the practical side of things. Customer journey. If you actually look up this term in Google, you end up with 140 million hits, which goes to show that this is a rather relevant subject. And in our following presentation, we want to show you what we as the GfK do with these facts and figures in terms of our analysis and what kind of insights we gain from that. The subject of customer journeys is not a new one. In the past, it was called the booking decision-making process, but now the Internet, of course, offers a wealth of new possibilities to the consumers, and the consumer actually has a much larger bandwidth of information that they can draw upon, and it's of course not only a benefit for the consumers but also for the tourism service providers who, for example, think about setting up new platforms, which becomes all the more relevant the more mobile people become and the more mobile devices they use. And for us, the Internet is not just a matter of research, it's also a medium for research. That means we also do customer surveys using online procedures. And well, that we would like to take you along onto this customer journey travel, that is the journey before the booking even takes place. Of course, the Internet offers all kinds of nice possibilities to the consumers, but for marketing purposes, this is rather a big challenge. On the one hand, the question arises what the booking behavior of the customer looks like and where he chooses his sources of information. We, for example, looked at the question what the Google search is in terms of relevance, and we asked ourselves what the real starting point of this customer journey is. We try to identify when the customer really thinks of traveling for the very first time and how much time passes and what happens until they actually start booking. A very relevant question is the role of mobile devices. We're seeing the surge in mobile devices and the fact that information is being downloaded onto these devices increasingly. And of course, there are also bookings being done with the help of these mobile devices. And this is very relevant for you as a head of marketing, for example, if you plan your ad campaigns. Of course, this is by no means a comprehensive list, but let's leave it at that. We would like to take a look at the following process. As I said, the first idea, that time when a customer for the first time really thinks about his next year's vacation, for example, thinking that it would be nice to go to Turkey, until they actually do their booking, which might be the booking of a journey to Greece. In between, we encounter the process where the customer actually touches upon many different touch points. These can be brands, these can be the traditional form of catalogs, or they can use the advice of travel agents. It could be just speaking to friends, like you went to Turkey 2 years ago. Did you like that? It could be advertising that they consume via television or other channels. That means that all of these are touch points relating to his future travel. These can be active or passive in their nature. And what we also can see is that between the first idea of perhaps spending the next holiday in Turkey and that quite frequently both the destination and the kind of vacation change until they actually book. And this is why it is so difficult for us to do exact forecasts for different destinations, for example, because if you ask customers 6 months ahead of their journey as to what they would like to do, then their real booking decision may still look absolutely different. So these kinds of surveys with a view to travel plans are not as accurate as we would wish them to be. So on top of that, this process is not a linear one, but it comes in many different forms. The consumers actually are rather nimble at combining different online and offline touchpoints in order to get the most out of the information they encounter. And it starts at any given point. This could be the starting point here. Then the first stop could be an OTA, an online travel agency or a travel portal. He could then go to the physical travel agent, get a number of catalogs, afterwards sit down, do a Google search. Perhaps he then returns to looking at online portals. And this just means that the chronology of this process is a rather complex one. And that is also one of the main focal points of our analysis. We try to actually decipher this for our customers. We want to show them the chronology of the use of these different touchpoints. And there are differences among the individual target groups too. But we want to enable our customers to optimize their media budgets along these lines of decision-making processes of certain target groups and how they use these touchpoints. Okay, let's look at the concrete aspects. Of course, the importance of the Internet cannot be denied any longer. We see here along the timeline that in 90% of all the travels that are being booked, the Internet plays some form of role, be it as a medium of information or of booking. That means that being present on the web is absolutely a must for all tour operators and destinations, service providers. You know, if you've got a larger number of customers and you want to be perceived by these customers as a travel or tour operator, you have to be present and visible on the Internet. But of course, Internet itself is not a standalone solution. Our data quite clearly indicate that 75% of travelers not only use the Internet, but at the same time also use so-called offline touchpoints. Be that the travel agent, where they go to get advice, or the catalogs that they look into, which means this kind of cross-channel use is to be encountered rather frequently. There is just a very small portion of users who exclusively use either Internet sources or offline touchpoints. As a rule, the customers are very knowledgeable about combining these different sources of information. They've learned to get the optimum of information. If we look at the individual reach of these touchpoints, it again becomes apparent how dominant the Internet is, quite independently from the fact of whether the customers just do their hotel bookings or flight bookings, or whether they are looking up package travels. In all of these three areas, the Internet's now got a reach that goes beyond 80% among the travelers. And what's also striking is that in package tourism, the travel agents and the catalogs still have a relatively high share. 42% of package tourists tell us that they had a look at catalogs before they did their booking. That would be my first question to Mr. Buller. Are you surprised by this rather large share of the use of catalogs? I mean, if you look around here at the ITB, you can see that all destinations actually offer lots of printed material. What is your take on the future development?
50%. I would rather turn the question around and say that the majority is not using these media anymore. You know it, that online media are much more flexible. When you book a flight, for example, you see that prices vary, and prices are also very flexible. The same applies to the hotel business. Prices rise and fall. And so a catalog will never be up to date. That's why I think that the usage of catalogs will drop even more. Catalogs is something that's just given to you all the time. It's a starting point to deal with the issue or the topic of traveling. We also realize that very often people use a catalog for inspiration or to get a first impression, to get a general idea of what they want. And once they have made a certain pre-selection, they use the Internet to do targeted research on potential destinations. But a catalogue is really very often a source of inspiration. Now, if you look at the share of online bookings online, we see that it has very different significance depending on what you look at. 75% or even more of the flight bookings are done online, 77% to be exact. Half of the hotel bookings are done online. If you look at package tours, that share is much smaller. 1 in 5 package tours is booked on the internet. And if we take all of these bookings together, we see that online bookings account for more than 50%. So 4 out of 10 trips are already booked online. And here's my question to you, Mr. Pohler. We heard that 80% of the customers seek information about package tours on the internet, but only 20% book it online. The interesting thing is this discrepancy. What about these 60%, the customers that get lost between looking and booking? Of course, there's a potential, especially with city trips or individual trips. This is very interesting for us. Then there is this packaging tool that Expedia offers. We think that this is indeed the market where there is the biggest growth potential, but technology plays a pivotal role. Availability is not as good as we would like to see. I mean, we bombard the customers with 30 billion products per day. How is the customer supposed to decide? It's as if you go to a travel agency, ask for a catalog, and you get 300 of them. So we have to break that information down to make the customer, help the customer navigate through it. So do you assume that online will rise? Yes, absolutely. We will see an increase in online bookings by 2 to 3% per year. Thank you. Perhaps I can tell you very briefly how we collect our data at GfK. First of all, we have a very big sample. It's called a consumer panel, including 20,000 households. So we continuously monitor people's travel behavior. And at the same time, we have installed certain software with a part of this sample that measures people's internet behavior. So the history, the pages that people open, the search terms they enter. We also look at people's TV consumption. So from the same sample, from a single source, we can monitor the impact all of this has on internet usage. That opens the way to a lot of different kinds of analyses. And this is where our data comes from. We already showed you this picture in the beginning. It visualizes a process. And here I'm showing you an example from the UK. Now you see that the thicker lines show you that there is more usage compared to the thin ones. Here too we have a starting point where the search starts and then a point at the end of that search. And between that, people surf back and forth. Either they enter specific search terms, they look at pages of destinations of travel agencies, or they enter generic terms, like, for example, wellness trip, holiday vacation, beach vacation. And you see, with the help of this graph, that it can turn into a real odyssey, especially if people spend too much time between all of these different options that they have before they make a booking. Although we have to say that is already the start of traveling, researching, looking for information, trying to identify your destination. All of this sounds very difficult, but it is already the start of your journey. There are studies that tell us that people spend 9 hours browsing the net before they decide for one trip. That sounds like a whole lot, but it's already part of the journey, so to speak. because you're already looking forward to your actual holiday. Then you can also look at the search terms. And you see here from the size of the letters which were the most frequent search terms. We took out the destinations, of course, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense to show you this. There are always destinations that are more popular than others. What we want to show here is that no matter what the destination is, what do people look for? Do they look for brands? Do they look for operators by name? What are the terms that they enter? And there's one very striking thing. Of course, you have the brand names of the travel operators or tour operators, but you also see a lot of transport companies. Like, for example, here, the German railway company, Deutsche Bahn, or the airports. Why is that? I mean, of course, once you've decided where you want to go and you've made a booking, you want to know how to get there. What are the different options? Very often you have rail and fly offers. And then, of course, there's a lot of domestic travel, and people might want to take the train. So this is why the transport companies feature very prominently. But then you also have Holiday Check, for example. It's a hotel review portal. This has also become very common. Before people go on a trip, they research customer reviews. They want to know whether the hotel is tidy, whether other people recommend it. And now what's interesting when we look at this process, we see two different kinds of customers or two kinds of customer behavior. On the one hand, we have the fast bookers, marked in blue. They book and start researching for a trip only 1 to 4 weeks before they go on their trip. So there's a very short information process. And then we have a group that we call intensive researchers, who might spend months or even a year to look for a holiday because they want to get that ultimate bargain, for example. Herbert, where do you see yourself? Are you an intensive researcher or are you rather a fast booker? It's very difficult if you're a tourism expert. I mean, I constantly am interested in this, but I book very quickly. So when I have an option that I like, I book it instantly. And then we can take a closer look at these two groups. So these would be the characteristics of these groups. The fast bookers very often book hotels or package tours. They like to go to the Mediterranean or to German-speaking regions. Many of them are female. They're relatively young and live in households with 2 people or more. Oh, I just realized that I find myself on the female side. Well, it's just a tendency, nothing to generalize. And then we have the intensive bookers. Most of them are a little older. I would call them the smart shopper. They look for the ultimate deal, as I said. They also like to go to the Mediterranean, but also go on long-haul trips. The majority of them are male, and very many of them look for flights only. And that is also very interesting to know for you as marketing officers, because you want to know how to reach out to the different target groups. I mean, you can imagine that these two groups of people want to have different kinds of information presented to them in different ways. I'm really surprised that women should be the fast bookers. Well, women are faster than men most of the time, aren't they? And now what's interesting about this is that there are more and more mobile devices. Now, from a different database, we looked at the data for penetration of smartphones and tablet PCs, and you see the breathtaking development of that usage. Today, 47% of the households have a smartphone, and in 40% of all households, you will find a tablet PC. And look at the pace of change. The figures have gone up from 16 to 47% in just 2 years. And so these new technologies enable people to look for information and holidays in a much more focused form. As a consequence, there is a dramatic increase in mobile searches, or search queries. So within just 1 year, we see an increase of almost 200%. Then there has been a study in the UK carried out by our colleagues, and that study tells us that smartphone users search for travel information very often, actually, in 25% of all of the queries. And you see all of the other information sessions per user, almost 9 minutes per session, more than 5 minutes. And you see when they do it during the week. For example, they browse when they have a break, they browse during lunchtime. It's like a little escape. You take the time that you have to dream of your holiday and to look forward to it. What do you think will happen to mobile in the future? What we see is that the traffic on fixed line is dropping, and the growth in traffic results from the usage of mobile devices. So if mobile was nice to have in the past, it has become an absolute must. We also see in our surveys that there are all of a sudden new target groups and customer groups. So we have new groups, not the ones who used to browse for information on a desktop or a PC, but because of the mobile devices, there are all of a sudden new customers who wouldn't have used stationary computers before. So this might actually help us to make use of new target groups. Well, so this is already the end of our little presentation. Let me give you a summary of our insights. So the Internet plays a role in 90% of German travel-related consumer journeys. We also said that the Internet is not a standalone solution. What happens is cross-channel use, meaning that the customers use very many different channels for looking at booking. This means for you, as a marketer, your presentation and the way you offer your information has to be consistent across all the different media. Otherwise, it will be too confusing for the user. Of course, the content can vary, and the way you advertise your product can also vary, but the general approach has to be consistent. We have explained that travel agencies and catalogs remain important touch points. Although there is a certain decline in their usage, they still serve as a source of inspiration and orientation. In the first phase, so before the customers go for more focused information searches. And there's this last information that you gave us. The share of online bookings will further increase. And we realized that the customer journey, including the purchase, can be extremely complex. For you being in charge of advertising, you have to be aware of the chronology of the various touch points. So where can the customer get in touch with your brand, and how can you distribute your media budget to make it as effective as possible? There was this question, do you have to be represented in social media? If you say yes, what is the budget that you want to dedicate? How would you shape your presentation on Facebook? What do you think about that? Do all of us have to be on Facebook? Yes, I think you have to. According to Facebook, half of the images posted or photos posted on Facebook are related to traveling. And even if people mainly talk among themselves as friends, this is still a channel that should be used. We also heard that search engine marketing plays an important role. You have to be aware which search terms your target groups look for, and you have to make sure that you are found on the internet. We explained that there are different user groups. We had the fast bookers and the intensive researchers, people in a constant mode of research. These are two very different groups, and they have to be addressed in different ways. Then, of course, there's this whole topic of internet goes mobile. We know that this leads to more queries online, and this also means that you have to make sure that your service, your offering is adapted to that use. And then as a next step, it might be very useful to make it possible for customers to book on the go. Out of home doesn't mean out of reach these days. So you could be able to reach your customers even while they're not at home. So thank you very much. I hope we provided you with some inspiring information. We at GfK have all the tools that we need to provide our customers with the analyses they require. If you have any questions or comments, we'll be happy to be available. Thank you.